All right, so you're busy, right? But you still want to know what's going on in the world.
Exactly.
That's where we come in with this deep dive.
Yeah.
We're cutting through the noise and looking at some of the biggest developments happening right now.
Right.
We've gone through a bunch of different sources, to make sure we're giving you a complete picture.
Absolutely, yeah.
So let's jump right in.
Okay, so we're going to start by looking at this debate that's been going on about the U.S. Department of Education. Like, should it even exist?
Yeah.
It's a pretty big question.
Right. A pretty fundamental question about how we approach education in this country.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to think about, for you listening, like, where did this whole thing even come from?
Yeah. How did we get here?
Well, the Department of Education was actually created fairly recently, relatively speaking.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was 1979 under President Carter.
Okay.
And there were two main goals at the time.
Right.
One was to make sure that civil rights were being upheld in education, equal access and all that.
Yeah, that's huge, of course.
And the second was to try to improve the overall quality of education across the board.
So make things better for everyone.
Exactly. But here's the thing, and you've probably heard this before. There are a lot of people who say that despite a pretty big budget, we're talking about $80 billion, student performance hasn't really improved the way people hoped it would.
Right. So the question becomes, is it actually working?
And that's where things get a little tricky. When you look at how American students are doing compared to students in other developed countries in subjects like math and science and reading, well, the rankings aren't always that great.
So that kind of fuels the argument for getting rid of the Department of Education altogether, right?
Yeah, and this is a big part of what former President Trump was talking about when he proposed eliminating the DOE. His idea was to basically send that money back to the states. Let them decide how to spend it.
Right, because the argument is that states might be better equipped to address their own unique educational challenges, right?
Yeah, that's a big part of it, this whole idea of local control.
Mm.
The argument goes that a big federal agency can end up being bureaucratic and out of touch with what's happening on the ground.
Yeah.
What works in one state might not work in another.
Right. One size fits all doesn't always apply when it comes to something as complex as education.
Exactly. And, just to be clear, we're not trying to take sides here.
Yeah.
We're laying out the different perspectives so you can understand the full picture.
Right, because there are valid points on both sides of this debate. It's not a simple issue.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I mean, you have the original goals of the DOE, which are super important, right? Making sure everyone has access to quality education. But then you have these concerns about effectiveness and whether a big federal agency is really the best way to achieve those goals.
It's a lot to think about for sure, and it affects all of us in one way or another, right?
Absolutely.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about something that's super relevant to everyone listening, no matter what side of the education debate you're on. And that's personal growth. You've probably heard this saying, if you're not reinventing yourself, you're falling behind.
Yeah, that's a good one. It's so true, especially in today's world. Things are changing so fast.
And it's not just about your job or career, right?
Yeah.
It's about staying engaged and excited about life in general.
Right. It's about being open to new things, learning, growing, adapting.
And sometimes that means embracing a more, ordinary path than you might have originally envisioned.
Yeah, and that can be tough. We're constantly bombarded with messages about success and achievement, right?
Absolutely.
But there's a lot of wisdom in that, saying, that failure is often grace in disguise. It's about accepting where you are and finding joy in the present moment.
Right. Not always chasing some future ideal. And that ties into something else we were looking at, this whole idea of influence.
Oh, yeah, influence.
Because we can all learn to be more effective at communicating our ideas and connecting with others.
Absolutely.
And apparently, Donald Trump, love him or hate him, he's been seen by some as someone who's really good at influence. There's a breakdown of 4 rules that supposedly underpin his approach.
Really?
Yeah. And it's all about having a clear message and understanding your audience and stuff like that.
Interesting. So it's not just about personality.
Yeah.
There are actual strategies you can learn.
That's what it seems like, which is kind of empowering, right? Because it means we can all get better at this.
Yeah, for sure. We can all learn to be more persuasive and impactful in our own way.
Exactly. And that learning can happen anywhere, right? It's not just about formal education.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. We're learning from books, from podcasts, from our jobs, from each other.
All the time.
Yeah, it's a constant process. And that's one of the things that makes life so interesting, right?
Absolutely. But it can also be overwhelming, right? Especially
Yeah.
when you think about how much information we're exposed to every single day.
Yeah, the news cycle is relentless. It's like a fire hose of information.
And it's hard to know what to pay attention to, what to ignore, how to avoid feeling completely overwhelmed by it all.
It is. It's a real challenge.
Hmm.
But there are things you can do to manage it, to make it less overwhelming.
Right, like this idea of spheres of attention, which I found really interesting.
Oh, yeah, that's a good framework.
Yeah.
It basically helps you think about how much mental energy you're giving to different pieces of information.
Right, so instead of just being bombarded by everything, you're being more intentional about what you let in and how deeply you engage with it.
Exactly. So, you know, you might just notice a headline as you're scrolling through social media, but you don't really pay much attention to it.
Right, it's just like a blip on your radar.
But then there might be something that catches your eye a little bit more, and you decide to read a brief summary.
Okay.
And then if it's something you really care about, you might read the whole article or watch a news segment.
Right, you're taking that next level of engagement.
And then if it's something you really want to dive deep into, you might do your own research, read multiple sources, really try to understand it from different angles.
So it's like a spectrum of engagement, depending on how relevant or interesting the information is to you.
Exactly. It's about being conscious of how you're using your attention and making sure you're not just getting swept away by the constant stream of information.
It's about taking control.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's shift gears one more time and talk about something a little more practical. You know, we've all been there. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you're hitting that wall.
Oh, yeah, the afternoon slump. It's a real thing.
So we've actually talked about this before on the show, but it's worth revisiting because it's so important. What are some things people can do to combat that afternoon energy dip?
Yeah, there are a few simple strategies that can make a big difference, like getting up and moving around, even if it's just for a few minutes.
Right, just to get your blood flowing.
Exactly. Or having a healthy snack. You know, something with some protein and complex carbs to give you sustained energy.
And of course, staying hydrated is crucial.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Water is like magic for your body.
It really is. And speaking of things that are essential for your well-being, we can't forget about sleep.
No, sleep is fundamental. It's so important for your physical and mental health.
And it's easy to sacrifice sleep when you're busy, right? But there are some really good reasons to prioritize it.
Yeah, it's not just about feeling rested. You know, when you sleep, your brain is processing information, consolidating memories, all kinds of important stuff is happening.
And sometimes even small changes to your routine can make a big difference. Like we were reading about how Vishen Lakhiani, the guy who wrote The Code of the Extraordinary Mind, he found that just having dinner earlier and switching to a Kindle for reading at night helped him sleep better.
Really, just those two things.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing,
It
right?
is. It shows you that you don't necessarily have to overhaul your entire life to see improvements.
Exactly. Sometimes it's the small things that make the biggest difference.
Yeah. And speaking of making changes, we were also looking at this concept of effortless discipline systems.
Oh, yeah, I like that.
It's basically about setting yourself up for success, you know, making it easier to make good choices rather than just relying on willpower all the time.
Right, because willpower is a finite resource, right? It gets depleted.
Exactly. So, for example, if you're trying to quit drinking, one of the key strategies is to just eliminate triggers, like get rid of the alcohol in your house.
Right, remove the temptation.
And then the next step is preparation. So if you know you're going to be in a situation where you might be tempted to drink, have a plan in place for how you're going to handle it.
Like have a non-alcoholic drink in your hand.
Exactly. And then the third part is connection. You know, having people you can talk to, people who support you in your goals.
Right, because it's always easier when you don't feel like you're doing it alone.
Absolutely.
And that actually ties in nicely with this other idea that we were looking at, which is decluttering.
Oh, yeah, minimalism.
It's not just about getting rid of stuff, though. It's about creating more space in your life for the things that really matter.
It's about being intentional about what you bring into your life and letting go of the things that are no longer serving you.
Right, whether that's physical clutter or mental clutter or even relationship clutter.
And it can be a really empowering process.
Absolutely, and it doesn't have to be overwhelming either.
No, you don't have to do it all at once.
There was some good advice from Anthony Ongaro, who's a minimalist YouTuber, about how to get started.
Oh, what did he say?
He said, To start small, like pick one drawer or one closet to declutter and just focus on that. And to make it fun, put on some music, maybe invite a friend over to help.
Yeah, make it a social thing.
And also find a community. There are tons of online groups and resources for people who are interested in minimalism.
So you don't have to feel like you're doing it alone.
Exactly. And finally, just a quick reminder because it's so important,
Okay.
stay hydrated.
Yes, drink water.
It sounds so simple, but it's amazing how many people don't drink enough water.
It's true. And your body needs water for everything. It's like the essential ingredient for life.
So there you have it, folks. We've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about the debate surrounding the Department of Education, the importance of personal growth and reinvention, strategies for managing information overload, and some practical tips for improving your well-being, from getting better sleep to decluttering your space.
And it all comes back to this idea of being intentional, right?
Absolutely. Making conscious choices about how you want to live your life.
Yeah, and recognizing that you have the power to shape your own experience.
So here's a question for you to ponder as we wrap up. Out of everything we talked about today, what resonates most with you? What are you going to explore further? What are you going to change in your own life? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for listening.